Somebody told me that 6 of 8 games were decided by one score or less in our league. Nothing shocks me about our league. Welcome to the SEC. It's hard every week.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. On today's show, we are going to get into it. The first time in SEC history, 2 top 5 teams lose to unranked opponents on the same day. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONCollege. Get $20 off your first purchase. All right. As we do each and every week, we do our losers of the weekend and our winners of the weekend. Sometimes we start with the winners, and sometimes the losers are so bad, we got to start with the losers. So let's dive right into it. As we start with our first loser of the weekend, how about Kalen DeBoer over at Alabama? I don't even know where to begin with this one. Just a week after an emotional home win over Kirby Smart in Georgia. Just a week after being ranked the #1 team in the country. Just a week after Bama fans everywhere proclaimed the Bama dynasty still alive. And well, going from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer, not a big deal. Bama goes out and loses a game to Vanderbilt. Not in baseball, not in basketball, football. The Tide fall to Vandy 40-35. 40 points given up to Vanderbilt. Somewhere Nick Saban was shaking his head. Somewhere Bear Bryant was rolling over in his grave. Somewhere even Mike Shula was chuckling, saying, I never lost to Vandy. It marked Vanderbilt's first win over the nation's top-ranked team ever. Vandy's been playing football for over 126 seasons, folks. Kalen DeBoer is the first coach of a top-ranked team to lose to Vandy. Vandy had not beaten Alabama on the football field in 40 years. Kalen DeBoer saying after the game, we've been tested in different ways, really a lot of the games here this season, and this is a different type of test now in our response. You think? Vandy jumped out to a 23-7 lead in the first half. Just the second time in the last 10 seasons, a #1 team trailed an unranked opponent by 16 or more points. Vanderbilt never trailed in the game. Alabama had 6 penalties for 57 yards. They never sacked Diego Pavia. And that's my other loser of the weekend, the Alabama defense. Vandy was 12 of 18 on third downs, 1 for 1 on fourth down. They didn't turn the ball over. Vandy racked up over 400 yards of offense. Alabama linebacker Deontay Lawson after the game saying, it's early, but we never want to feel this way again. And look, Bama has time to right the ship and come back from this. But the most concerning stat, if you're an Alabama fan to me, over their last 6 quarters of football, Alabama has given up 67 points to their opponent. 27 in the second half against Georgia, 40 in the game against Vandy. That's alarming. I had to look it up. The last time Bama gave up that many points in back-to-back games, you got to go back to the end of the 2018 season where they gave up 34 to Oklahoma in their semifinal win and then 44 points to Clemson in the loss in the national championship game. By the way, the 2 quarterbacks they faced in those games, Kyler Murray and Trevor Lawrence, 2 future #1 overall draft picks. Not doubting his ability, but I don't think Diego Pavia is going to be a future #1 overall draft pick. Paul Feinbaum went after Kalen DeBoer on Saturday. He said, Nick Saban would have never lost that game. Never did lose that game. But he went on to say he blamed this one on Nick Saban because it was just a couple of weeks ago, Nick Saban doing a feature piece said the only place you play in the SEC that's not hard is Vanderbilt. That went up on the bulletin board. They played it all week. They played it on the Jumbotron at the end of the game. So Paul Feinbaum said, Nick Saban, this is your fault. you cost your former team the win yesterday against Vanderbilt. Look, again, I still think Kalen DeBoer's a pretty good coach. I think he could bounce back from this, but they got to dig deep. Bama does. Road is tough. You got some tough games coming down the pipe. And, man, losing to Vanderbilt, never in a million years would have thought that one. I want to say Vandy was plus 1,100 straight up on FanDuel. I was checking the line, and I was like, it's not going to happen, but maybe Vandy can cover the spread. Crazy. All right, how about another loser of the weekend? Josh Heupel. After climbing to number 4 in the country, the excitement around the Tennessee Volunteers came crashing back down to earth as they lost to the Arkansas Razorbacks in Fayetteville 19-14 Saturday night. Vols built up a 14-3 lead, and they watched as the Razorbacks scored the final 16 points in a 19-14 upset. Chris Fowler revealing after the game, it's the first time in the history of the SEC that a pair of top 5 teams have fallen to an unranked opponent on the same day. Tennessee offensive line, they struggled to protect Nico all night long. Arkansas had 4 sacks. They pressured Nico throughout the game. Tennessee's defense was pretty solid much of the night, but, I mean, the hallmark offense of Josh Heupel was underwhelming. They came into the weekend number 1 in the FBS in points scored per game, and they scored 14. Arkansas outgained them by 100 yards, 430 to 330. Tennessee had 10 penalties on the night. And as they were walking off the field, defensive lineman Amari Thomas, he was called out after being caught on video shoving a fan. On Sunday, he took to social media to issue an apology. A little bit Jermaine Burton-esque. But this is what's concerning if you're Tennessee. You scored 69 against Chattanooga, 51 against NC State, 71 against Kent State, and in their 2 SEC games so far, 25 points and 14 points. That's not going to get it done. Next up for the Vols, they host the Florida Gators on Saturday night in Neyland. Also keep in mind, they still have to play Bama in Georgia. So a lot to improve on still for Tennessee. Another loser of the weekend. How about Eli Drinkwitz? Mizzou was ranked 9th in the country, playing their first road game of the year. They were shut out in the first half, down 24-0 at Texas A&M. Midway through the third quarter, it was 34-0 A&M before Mizzou finally found the end zone. And Mizzou getting blown out at Texas A&M. It just looked like Drinkwitz did not have his team ready to play. They were the ones coming off the bye week. But it looked like A&M was the team coming off the bye week. Mizzou just 254 yards of total offense. A&M had over 500 yards. I also thought it was a little cheap in the final minute that they kicked a meaningless field goal in the final seconds to make it, 41-10? I mean, you go for the score there. You try to make it 41-14, make it, carry a little momentum over. Say, hey, we didn't go out without a fight. You kick a field goal. What does that do? Paul Feinbaum said on his podcast on Sunday, Mizzou has not proven anything. They've played into the perception of Mizzou being a fraudulent top 10 team. They're a good team. They're just a fraudulent top 10 team. Next up for Mizzou, a weird road trip at UMass this Saturday and a tough stretch after that with Auburn, at Bama, Oklahoma, at South Carolina. More pitfalls coming for Mizzou. Another loser of the weekend, Hugh Freeze. And look, it didn't really have much to do with how Auburn performed in their 31-13 loss in Athens versus Georgia. Auburn actually, I thought, played pretty competitively. They scored right after halftime to make it a 14-10 deficit. They were within 4. Again, they got within 2 scores later, down 28-13. And for the first time this season, Auburn had 0 turnovers. That's a win. Should celebrate that. But unfortunately, Auburn, with the loss, drops to 2-4 on the season and 0-3 in SEC play. And Auburn now needs to find 4 more wins on their schedule just to get to a bowl game. Now, they should beat Louisiana Monroe. But even games against Vandy and Kentucky look much tougher than they did a couple weeks ago. And you still have to play A&M, at Mizzou, at Bama. It just feels like Hugh Freeze might be going backwards here. He goes 6-7 last year. Probably trending toward 5-7 this year. Now, he is recruiting well. They do have a top 5 recruiting class currently for 2025, but Auburn, where are we going? Where are we going with this thing? How do we get this train back on the tracks? Auburn does get their bye week this week to think about things. And then next up in our loser of the weekend, South Carolina's offense. Look, I got excited when I heard Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders were going to be coming back this week, back from injuries, hosting number 12 ranked Ole Miss at 3-1. You thought South Carolina, they're going to give them a dogfight. Credit the Gamecocks defense. They held that mighty Ole Miss offense to just 27 points. But the South Carolina offense, you scored just 3. And a lot of this falls at Shane Beamer's feet, right? They had an awful fake punt early in the game. They didn't convert. Gave Ole Miss a short field. And offensively, 300 yards of offense, 2 turnovers, 8 penalties, averaged 3.5 yards a carry. Lenore Sellers threw for just 162 yards. They were 1 for 4 on fourth downs. Ole Miss defense, they played really well. They had 6 sacks on the day. But a Carolina team that scored 33 against LSU, 31 against Kentucky, 50 against Akron, they failed to find the end zone in the entire game against Ole Miss at home. Doesn't get much easier going to Alabama this weekend for South Carolina. And our last loser of the weekend, I'm putting the SEC in here. The SEC made what was already known official on Sunday. The league fined Vanderbilt $100,000 after their fans rushed the field following the win over Alabama. Arkansas, they saw their team storm the field in Fayetteville after they beat Tennessee. They incurred a $250,000 penalty. Now, Vanderbilt's fine was their first offense under the SEC's revised access to competition deal that they started middle of last year. Arkansas, their second-time offender because their fans stormed the court when their men's basketball team beat Duke back in November. Look, I get why they do it. I get the whole safety thing and all that, but I just think it's silly when they find the schools because largely the administration doesn't care. They go, when they ask these athletic directors after big football wins, they go, we'll pay the fine. We don't care. The fans definitely don't care. There's no repercussions. And again, the only thing that really is in jeopardy there is the safety of the losing team. As we saw with Amari Thomas pushing a fan. We saw that with Jermaine Burton. We've seen incidents in the past, but for the most part, fans don't care. So again, I think there will be more conversations about how do we prevent this from happening. But look, big wins, it's just ingrained in our back of our brains. If it's a big win, a monster upset, you storm the field and you hope everybody's safe and you hope nothing crazy happens. But I just think it's silly when the SEC is like, we're going to fine you. Nobody cares. Like everyone, the school goes, we're going to pay the fine. Don't care. All right, still more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. We'll switch to a little bit of positivity next. We'll get to our winners of the weekend. That's coming your way in just a second. But first, today's episode presented to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. Look, when you are hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They're going to help you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking at the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Go post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Go post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Keep coming back and checking us out. We'll have plenty of great content and reaction throughout the week. We'll be getting a perspective from Arkansas after their big win. We'll be getting a perspective from Vanderbilt on their big win. So keep it locked right here. Locked On SEC. We'll have some special guests joining us throughout the week. Also want to thank Jordan Rogers from SEC Nation, SEC Network, joining us last Friday to preview the games. He was in College Station, and I tried to tell Jordan, and we were running through the games, and I said, hey, the Vanderbilt Commodores, Diego Pavia, pretty good. He goes, yeah, I appreciate you giving my alma mater some credit, but come on, they're not going to beat Alabama. They did. All right, let's jump into our winners of the weekend. And speaking of Clark Lea and Vanderbilt, they're our first winner here on the docket. Clark Lea and Vanderbilt, we ran through the historic numbers already. Vanderbilt defeated Alabama 40-35. And while Clark Lea is just 12-29 overall as a head coach, he got his biggest resume win ever and Vanderbilt's biggest football win ever. The largest lead Vandy had ever had on the number one team in the country. It was 23-7, which they held in the second quarter of this game. What a win. Vanderbilt fans, they tear down the goalpost. They walk the 20 plus or so blocks down Broadway to the river where they dumped the goalposts. And the craziest stat, I mean, Vanderbilt was 0-60 in their last 60 games against top 5 teams. That stat is now 1-60. Congrats to Clark Lea. Also, congrats to Diego Pavia. The quarterback was outstanding, 16 of 20 for 252 yards, 2 passing touchdowns. He also had 56 rushing yards. Tight end Eli Stowers, awesome, 113 yards receiving. Junior Sherrill had a monster 36-yard touchdown catch on a 4th and 1. Cedric Alexander had some hard rushing yards, 64 rush yards and 2 rushing scores. But you got to give a ton of credit to Tim Beck and Jerry Kill coming over with Pavia from New Mexico State. It's the hire of the offseason with Clark Lea bringing those 3 gentlemen over to Nashville. And you know what's crazy to think about? Vanderbilt is really only 2 plays away from being undefeated. They give up that late score to Georgia Southern, where they had just went down the field to take the lead, and they give up the go-ahead touchdown late to Georgia Southern, and then had a chance to really punch in the go-ahead touchdown in double overtime against Mizzou. Or was it regular overtime? Whatever it was. They didn't do it. Regular overtime. If they had just made those 2 plays, we'd be talking about a 5-0 Vanderbilt team right now. It's crazy. And what now looks to be a very intriguing game this Saturday night as Vandy travels to Kentucky, both teams coming off of monster upsets. Vandy beating Alabama, and the Cats just a week ago beating Ole Miss in Oxford. So, yeah, Vandy, Kentucky, sign me up. Would not have thought that would be an attractive game just a few weeks ago. All right, another winner of the weekend. How can you not feel good for Sam Pittman? A monster win for Pittman's resume as they beat Tennessee 19-14. Late in the game, Taylon Green gets banged up. They got to go to backup quarterback Malachi Singleton. And no problem. Singleton takes the Razorbacks down the field for the go-ahead touchdown drive. Runs it in himself with 1:17 remaining. And Arkansas notches their first home win over a top 5 opponent since beating the number 3 Volunteers back in 1999. Sam Pittman saying, our kids, our coaches did a wonderful job of preparing our guys and making them believe that we could go win tonight. Another shout out to Arkansas's defense. That defense we mentioned earlier had 4 sacks on Nico Iamaleava, held them to just 17 of 29 passing, only 158 yards passing. Dylan Sampson did have the rushing yards. He had 138 yards on the ground and 2 scores. But Arkansas held the Vols to 0 for 2 on 4th down, including the game-sealing stop. Credit defense coordinator Travis Williams. He held Auburn to 14. He held Tennessee to 14. He held A&M to 21 in the loss there. There's a world you could argue, again, I like to do the what ifs, but you could argue Arkansas could be 6-0 right now. They had the late overtime loss at Oklahoma State, and then the 4-point loss a week ago to A&M. Again, just a couple plays here and there, and you're talking about an undefeated Arkansas team. Sam Pittman and the Hogs, they get a lot of credit for being 4-2, 2-1 in the SEC. A much improved Arkansas team. Next up, a bye week before they host number 13 LSU coming up on October 19th. Another winner of the weekend, we're going to throw Carson Beck in here. A nice bounce-back game for Carson Beck after multiple turnovers in the loss to Bama a week prior. He protected the football against Auburn, went 23 for 29, 240 yards passing, connected on touchdown passes to Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett, and a nice win in the Deep South's oldest rivalry, making that 8 straight wins now for Georgia in the rivalry. 11 of their last 12 and 17 of the last 20. Georgia has won over Auburn. And Carson Beck now 4th in the SEC in passing yards, 3rd in touchdown passes. And Kirby Smart's Bulldogs, they improved to 4-1 on the year. Next up, a very winnable game hosting Mississippi State before their next tough test, traveling to number 1 Texas on October 19th. Do want to throw in here one other tidbit. Kirby Smart, after the game, critical of the Georgia fans. Talking with the local news there, he said, quote, "I tell you what, it was hot out there today. If anything, to be honest, I'm a little disappointed. Probably disappointed in our fans for the first time that I thought there was a lack of really affecting the game crowd noise-wise, passion and energy. We're trying to have a home field advantage like we've had when we've played against teams, and I can't get crowd noise, you know? That's frustrating for me. So I'll just be honest about it, that I think we need to do a better job as fans." So challenge issued, Bulldog fans. Kirby Smart saying, where's the home field advantage? I know it's hot, but it's hot out here for us. And we're, our guys are wearing pads and uniforms and oof. Well, Georgia, challenge issued. Do you accept the challenge? Go out there and be fired up for the Bulldogs against Mississippi State. All right, another impressed of the weekend. How about Levan Moss, the Aggie running back? 12 carries, 138 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. He also had 2 catches for 35 yards receiving as the Aggies demolished top 10 Mizzou 41-10. Amari Daniels also added 34 yards rushing and 2 rushing touchdowns himself. Remember all the talk at the start of the year when they lost Ruben Owens to the season? And look, no offense to Ruben Owens. I thought he was going to be a big-time contributor this year, but he was still technically 3rd on the depth chart behind Levan Moss and Amari Daniels, who had the bulk of the work a year ago. So I think we overreacted a little bit to that. I remember reading articles. People were like, A&M lost their starting running back. And I was going, oh, wait a minute. I don't know if Ruben Owens was going to be the starting running back. Maybe he would have earned it. We don't know. But it was a little bit of a slap in the face to Levan Moss and Amari Daniels, who had been around for a while and kind of been doing their thing. And Levan Moss, to me, just really, really good running back. And, don't look now, but he now leads the SEC in rushing yards. 609 on the season. Jumped ahead of Dylan Sampson, Henry Parrish, Jaquindon Jackson, Jarquez Hunter. That's your top 5 rushers in the SEC. But Levan Moss, number 1 on that list. Another impress of the weekend. Welcome back, Connor Wegman. Full control of the A&M offense on Saturday. Marcel Reed had filled in for them the last couple of weeks, but Connor Wegman, we heard, he was going to be a game time decision, but they kept saying that the last couple of weeks. So I kind of just figured, he's not going to be back. And remember that tiff earlier in the week where Eli Drinkwitz was like, yeah, it's all a smoke screen. They're lying. We know it's going to be Marcel Reed. Mike Elko saying after the game, no, we decided Connor Wegman, he got back at practice this week and he was going to be the guy. 18 of 22, 276 yards passing, 33 yards rushing as well. And like I said, Marcel Reed did a nice job filling in, but Wegman, he just makes them a more complete team. And their wide receivers are coming around. Terry Bussey, Noah Thomas, Jade Walker. Give some love to the Aggie defense, too. 6 sacks on the day against Brady Cook and Mizzou. And shout out Mike Elko. He is now 5-1 overall, 3-0 in the SEC. And really, that tough week 1 slugfest with Notre Dame, they're that close to being potentially undefeated at 6-0. A&M, they now get their bye week before an easy-looking road trip to Mississippi State. And then that LSU game looms large on October 26th. But really, their toughest test after that in the season finale, hosting Texas on November 30th. So, look, even if A&M, let's just say they lose to LSU, but they beat the rest, that's a 10-2 A&M team that's getting into the college football playoff. Shout out to J.D. Pickell. He did a video this weekend saying A&M, that's a team that's on the radar now for a playoff spot. Congrats to Mike Elko. Congrats to the Aggies. And our last impress of the weekend, how about Billy Napier? Really needed this one as the Gators rise up as underdogs, upsetting Gus Malzahn's UCF Knights 24-13 in Gainesville Saturday night. Florida defense held UCF's offense to just 273 total yards, 4 of 12 on third downs, 0 for 2 on fourth downs. And the Gators held the Knights to just 108 on the ground. That's the 3rd lowest rushing total during Malzahn's 4 seasons in Orlando. They also had 5 sacks on the night. Offensively, Graham Mertz, really good. He went 19 of 23 for 179 yards and a score. And Graham Mertz is now second in the country in completion percentage, just a hair behind Oregon's Dylan Gabriel, completing 77% of their passes. It was Florida's most complete game of the season. They are above 500 for the first time in nearly 11 months. And next up, Florida will play at Tennessee. The question is, can Billy Napier find 3 more wins on the schedule? At Florida State in the season finale looks winnable now. Can they beat Kentucky? Can they beat LSU? Can they beat Ole Miss? Again, got to find 3 more wins to get them to a bowl game. Still more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your teams every day. Want to remind you guys, today's episode presented to you by the Game Time app. Game Time, they have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Their curation process makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever it is. The all-in pricing feature, I love that one. It shows you your total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Of course, seat views, you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know what the view is going to look like. They also offer the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Go take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time and download the Game Time app. Create an account, use our code LOCKEDONCollege, get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem our code LOCKEDONCollege, get $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. All right, roll along here. Locked On SEC. And as we start to wrap up, a few more things we need to touch on before we call it a show. Did want to touch on the Week 7 polls in the SEC, and we'll bring it up real quick. It was the week of upheaval in the Associated Press college football poll. In both polls, Texas moved up to number 1 with Alabama losing. So AP poll and coaches poll, Texas coming in number 1. The AP poll has Georgia at 5. The coaches poll had Georgia at 4. And then the other 3 are all from the Big Ten in the top 5. It's Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State. 2, 3, and 4 in the AP, 2, 3, and 5 in the coaches poll. And then there's a little bit of discrepancy here with some other teams. Both polls have Bama at 7. The AP has Tennessee at 8 and Ole Miss at 9. The coaches poll has them flipped. They put Ole Miss at 8 and Tennessee at 9. Here's the interesting one. AP poll has LSU at 13. That's where LSU was last week. LSU had a bye week, and all these teams ahead of them lost. The AP said, screw you, LSU. We're going to keep you at 13. The coaches poll moved LSU up from 13 up to 10. So the coaches poll has Clemson, Notre Dame, and Ohio State all behind LSU at 11, 12, 13. The AP jumped all 3 of them ahead of LSU. Clemson, Iowa State, Notre Dame all ahead of LSU. AP's got A&M at 15th. Coaches poll had A&M at 14th. So they gave them a little bit more credit than with the Mizzou win. Oklahoma in the AP poll, 18th. Coaches poll, 16th. And then the last SEC team to be ranked, AP poll, very angry at Mizzou after their loss. They dropped them from 9 to 21. Coaches poll, a little bit more forgiving, putting them at 18. So normally you don't see that big of a discrepancy in the AP and coaches poll. Like normally it's just a spot here or two, but there was there was more teams there with discrepancies. But what stands out the most? I mean, 9 SEC teams ranked, pretty nuts. But 6 of the 18 AP top 25 teams that played this week lost to unranked opponents. That's the highest mark since 6 of the top 16 lost the first week of October 2020. Now that was a little bit different. Remember, we were playing all conference games. The SEC, like it was COVID year, so everything was weird. But yeah, man, biggest movers. A&M moves up from 25 to 15 in the coaches poll or the AP poll. So, it is what it is. The polls don't mean much of anything because we know down the road you're going to get the college football playoff rankings. That's what really matters. So just something fun to kind of talk about early in the season. But, so many of these teams play one another, so it really doesn't matter. Like, you're going to have movement up and down anyway. All right. Before we get out of here, the SEC Network's weekly traveling pregame show, SEC Nation, announced they are headed to the Texas State Fair as number 2 Texas will take on number 19 Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry. The show will originate from the Hall of State starting at 9 Central, 10 Eastern on Saturday on the SEC Network. This is the 120th storied border battle. First time the SEC Nation crew will cover this game. That's what's going to be so weird is, we're used to seeing the Red River rivalry, or I guess they don't say shootout anymore, but it's going to be the first time we're going to see the SEC logo on the field with Texas and Oklahoma. Like, at least with Texas playing SEC teams, it doesn't feel weird. With Oklahoma playing SEC teams, it doesn't feel weird. But Texas playing Oklahoma, just for the last whatever, it's been a Big 12 rivalry, and now it is an SEC rivalry. But Marty and McGee, they will be live on site starting at 8 a.m. Central, 9 Eastern. They're in Dallas, and Paul Feinbaum will be live from there on Friday, getting you set. So any Sooner fans or Longhorn fans heading out to Dallas for the State Fair and all that stuff, you can take in all the SEC shows. Should be a lot of fun. All right, thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out some of our great shows we've got here on the network, whether it's Locked On Bama with Luke Robinson, whether it's Locked On Georgia with Clint and Daniel. They do a great job. Check them out wherever you find your podcasts on YouTube. And like we said, wherever you get your podcasts on Apple, iTunes, and Spotify. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. You guys have a great day. Hopefully you didn't get your feelings hurt with any of our losers or winners. There's always next week in the SEC.